London, 1819. The morning of her wedding dawned grey and misty, as though the heavens themselves mourned what was to come. Lady Evelyn Pemberton stood before the tall windows of her bedchamber in her family's townhouse, watching the fog roll through the streets of Mayfair. Behind her, 3 maids fussed with the ivory silk of her wedding gown, adjusting the delicate lace that fell from her shoulders like morning dew on spider webs. The dress was exquisite, commissioned from the finest modiste in London, with seed pearls sewn into patterns of roses along the bodice. It was everything a bride should wear, yet Evelyn felt nothing but a hollow emptiness in her chest. "You look beautiful, my lady," whispered Mary, her lady's maid, who had been with her since she was a child. There were tears in the older woman's eyes, though whether they were tears of joy or sorrow, Evelyn could not say. "Thank you, Mary," Evelyn replied softly, her fingers fidgeting with the sapphire bracelet her late mother had worn on her own wedding day. It was the something blue, a tradition Evelyn clung to, even as everything else about this day felt wrong, forced, arranged by hands that cared nothing for her happiness. Her father had been dead for 2 years now, lost to a fever that had swept through London like a silent plague. Her mother had followed him 6 months later, some said from a broken heart, others from the same illness that lingered in their household. At 19, Evelyn had found herself alone in the world, save for a modest inheritance and a title that attracted the wrong sort of attention. The fortune hunters had circled like wolves, and it had been her father's executor, Mr. Pemberton the solicitor, who had suggested the match with the Duke of Ashbourne. "He is a good man, your ladyship, Mr. Pemberton had assured her in his dusty office, his spectacles sliding down his thin nose as he reviewed the marriage contract. "Wealthy, titled, and in need of an heir. He will provide for you, protect you. In these uncertain times, it is the best match you could hope for." Evelyn had wanted to protest, to insist that she needed time to grieve, to find her own way in the world. But she was a woman alone, and the wolves were growing bolder. Just the previous week, Lord Hartley, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty to his servants, had cornered her at a musicale and proposed in terms that were more threat than offer. She had fled to the retiring room, her heart pounding with fear. So she had agreed to meet the Duke of Ashbourne. Their first encounter had been in the drawing-room of her townhouse, with Mr. Pemberton present as chaperone. Edward Thornton had entered the room with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his expertly tailored coat. His hair was dark, almost black, with a slight curl that suggested he had not long ago come in from riding, but it was his eyes that had captured Evelyn's attention. Grey as a winter storm, sharp and intelligent, yet holding something else beneath the surface, pain perhaps, or loneliness. "Lady Pemberton," he had said, bowing with perfect formality. His voice was deep, cultured, the accent of someone educated at the finest schools. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." "Your Grace," Evelyn had replied, curtsying as she had been taught since childhood. "The pleasure is mine." They had sat awkwardly at first, while Mr. Pemberton laid out the terms of the proposed union. The Duke needed an heir, his family line stretching back centuries and requiring continuation. Evelyn needed protection and security. It was, as Mr. Pemberton repeatedly emphasized, an ideal arrangement for both parties. Throughout the discussion, Evelyn had watched the Duke's face, trying to read the man behind the mask of aristocratic composure. He spoke little, asking occasional questions about her education, her interests, her health. When he learned she played the pianoforte and enjoyed reading, something flickered in those grey eyes, but it was gone before she could identify it. "I must be frank, Lady Pemberton," the Duke had said as the meeting drew to a close. "I am not a romantic man. I do not believe in love matches or passionate declarations. What I offer is respect, security, and a position in society that will protect you from those who would take advantage of your situation. In return, I ask only that you provide me with an heir and manage my household with the dignity befitting your station. Is this acceptable to you?" Evelyn had felt her heart sink even further, but she had lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. "It is, Your Grace. I have no illusions about the nature of this union. I ask only that you treat me with basic kindness and allow me some small freedoms in managing my own days." "That seems reasonable," the Duke had replied, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth had lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I believe we understand each other, Lady Pemberton." The engagement had been announced the following week, and London society had erupted with gossip and speculation. The Duke of Ashbourne, who had shown no interest in marriage for years, despite being 30 years of age and the target of every matchmaking mama in England, was finally taking a bride. And not just any bride, but the orphaned Lady Pemberton, a beauty with impeccable lineage, but little fortune. The ton whispered behind their fans. Was it a love match after all? Had the austere Duke finally fallen prey to a pretty face? But those who watched the couple at social events saw no evidence of romance. The Duke was attentive in the way duty required, escorting Evelyn to the opera, standing up with her for exactly 2 dances at balls, calling upon her at appropriate intervals. But there was no warmth in his manner, no tender glances or whispered endearments. They were like 2 actors playing roles in a theatrical production, hitting their marks with precision but no passion. Evelyn's aunt, Lady Margaret Hawthorne, had appeared during the engagement period like a carrion bird sensing opportunity. Lady Hawthorne was her mother's younger sister, a woman who had married a baronet with more title than fortune, and had spent the subsequent 20 years resenting everyone who had fared better than she. Her visits to Evelyn's townhouse became more frequent as the wedding approached, always accompanied by observations that cut like knives wrapped in silk. "Such a grand match for you, my dear," she would say, examining Evelyn's trousseau with eyes that glittered with envy. "Your dear mother would be so proud. Of course, she always said you had your looks to recommend you, even if the fortune was modest. A duke, though? Who would have imagined? You must have impressed him greatly, though one does wonder what a man of his standing sees in a girl with no family to support her." "I have family, Aunt Margaret," Evelyn would reply, struggling to keep her voice even. "I have you." "Indeed, indeed, and I shall always be here for you, child. Someone must look after your reputation, after all. A young woman alone in London can so easily become the subject of unfortunate rumours." It was during one of these visits, just 3 weeks before the wedding, that Count Blackwood had arrived. He was an old friend of Evelyn's late father, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s who had been travelling abroad when her parents died. Upon returning to England and learning of her loss, he had come to pay his respects and offer his condolences. The afternoon had been pleasant, with Evelyn serving tea, while the Count reminisced about her father's younger days. Lady Hawthorne had been present, nominally as chaperone, though she had contributed little to the conversation beyond pointed observations about propriety and the dangers of being too welcoming to gentlemen callers when one was engaged to be married. The storm had blown in suddenly, as spring storms often did in England. One moment the sky was merely overcast, the next it was black as night, with rain lashing the windows and thunder shaking the walls. When the Count had prepared to take his leave, it was clear that travelling in such weather would be foolhardy. "You must stay until the storm passes, Count Blackwood," Evelyn had insisted, glancing at the deluge beyond the windows. "I could not in good conscience send you out in such conditions. We have guest rooms aplenty, and you would be most welcome." The Count had protested, conscious of the impropriety, but Lady Hawthorne had surprisingly agreed. "Indeed, you must stay, Count. It would be most dangerous to travel. I myself shall remain as well to ensure everything is proper. My niece's reputation must be above reproach." And so the Count had stayed, spending the evening in perfectly appropriate conversation in the drawing room before retiring to a guest chamber on the opposite end of the house from Evelyn's rooms. Lady Hawthorne had maintained her vigil, sitting with them the entire evening, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The Count had departed the following morning as soon as the roads were passable, thanking Evelyn for her hospitality and promising to call again before the wedding. Evelyn had thought nothing more of the incident until 2 weeks later, when the Duke had called upon her unexpectedly. His face had been like stone, his eyes cold in a way that made her shiver. "I have heard disturbing rumours, Lady Pemberton," he had said without preamble, refusing her offer of tea. "Regarding your relationship with Count Blackwood?" Evelyn had felt her blood run cold. "What rumours, Your Grace? The Count is a friend of my late father's. He called to offer condolences. He spent the night in your home. During a terrible storm, yes. My aunt was present the entire time as chaperone," Everything was perfectly proper. The Duke's jaw had tightened. That is not what I have been told. I have been informed by a reliable source that the Count has been a frequent visitor, that there were intimacies between you before our engagement. That is a lie, Evelyn had protested, rising from her chair in shock. Who would tell you such falsehoods? I have never been anything but proper with Count Blackwood or any other gentleman. The source is unimpeachable, the Duke had replied, his voice hard. Someone who cares deeply about your welfare and felt obligated to inform me of the truth. The truth? There is no truth to these accusations. Edward, please, you must believe me. Do not presume to use my Christian name, he had interrupted, his eyes flashing with anger. We are not yet married, and I begin to wonder if we should be. However, the contracts are signed, the announcements made. I will not provide fodder for gossip by crying off at this late date. The wedding will proceed as planned, Lady Pemberton. But do not expect more from me than the bare minimum required by law and custom. He had left without another word, leaving Evelyn trembling with shock and fury. She had tried to discover who had spread such vicious lies, but no one would tell her. The servants knew nothing or claimed not to. Her few friends expressed sympathy, but could offer no names. It was as though the rumors had materialized from the fog itself, poisonous and pervasive. Now, on her wedding day, Evelyn stared at her reflection in the mirror and wondered what future awaited her. The Duke clearly believed the rumors, or at least doubted her enough to hold her at arm's length. She was marrying a man who thought her a liar, perhaps worse. What kind of marriage could they possibly have? It is time, my lady, Mary said softly, adjusting the veil one final time. The carriages are waiting. The ceremony took place at St. George's in Hanover Square, the fashionable church where all the best people married. The pews were filled with the cream of London society, all dressed in their finest, their faces alight with curiosity and speculation. Evelyn walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Pemberton, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. Every step felt like walking to her doom. The Duke stood at the altar, magnificent in his formal attire. His face was impassive, revealing nothing of his thoughts as he watched her approach. When she reached his side and Mr. Pemberton placed her hand in the Duke's, Evelyn felt the coolness of his fingers, the rigid control in every line of his body. The vicar droned through the ceremony, his voice echoing in the vast space. Evelyn made her responses mechanically, her voice barely above a whisper. The Duke's voice was firm and clear, each word enunciated with precision, as though he were conducting a business transaction rather than pledging his life to another person. I now pronounce you man and wife, the vicar concluded. You may kiss the bride. The Duke turned to Evelyn, and for just a moment she thought she saw something soften in his eyes. Then the mask was back in place. He leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, the lightest of touches, over almost before it began. The congregation applauded politely, and it was done. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, bound to a man who believed her a liar and a cheat. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashbourne House, the Duke's principal London residence. The townhouse was magnificent, 5 stories of pale stone with soaring ceilings and rooms filled with priceless art and furniture. Servants moved through the crowds with trays of champagne and delicacies, while society's finest congratulated the newlyweds with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Lady Hawthorne was among the guests, resplendent in peacock blue silk that did nothing to flatter her sallow complexion. She embraced Evelyn with theatrical warmth, whispering in her ear, "Such a triumph, my dear. I do hope you can make him happy. Men of his station have such particular expectations of their wives." There was something in her tone, something smug and satisfied that made Evelyn's skin crawl. But before she could question her aunt, Lady Hawthorne had moved away, accepting congratulations from other guests as though she had personally arranged the match. The celebrations continued until late afternoon, when finally the last guest departed, and Evelyn found herself alone with her new husband in the grand drawing room. The Duke stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a military posture. "The servants will show you to your chambers," he said without turning. "You will find everything arranged for your comfort. Dinner will be served at 8. We dress formally." "Edward," Evelyn said, then corrected herself at his sharp glance. "Your Grace." Can we not talk about what has passed between us? If you would only listen to my side—" "There is nothing to discuss," he interrupted, finally turning to face her. His expression was carved from ice. "You are now my wife, and I will treat you with the respect due your position. But do not ask for my confidence or affection. Those are not part of our bargain. But the rumors, they are false. If you would only allow me to explain—" "Enough." His voice cracked like a whip. "I have made my position clear. Now, if you will excuse me, I have business to attend to." He strode from the room, leaving Evelyn standing alone among the debris of the wedding breakfast. Half-empty champagne glasses, wilted flowers, crumpled napkins. It seemed an apt metaphor for her marriage. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by magic. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "If you will follow me, Your Grace, I will show you to your apartments." The Duchess's chambers were on the second floor, a suite of rooms decorated in soft greens and creams. There was a sitting room with a view of the garden, a dressing room lined with wardrobes already filled with her trousseau, and a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed hung with silk curtains. It was beautiful, luxurious, and utterly impersonal. "The Duke's chambers are through that door, Mrs. Henderson said, indicating a door Evelyn had not noticed. "He will come to you tonight for what is customary on a wedding night. Is there anything you need, Your Grace?" Evelyn wanted to say yes. She needed her parents back. She needed this to be a bad dream from which she could wake. But she simply shook her head. "No, thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You have been most kind." The housekeeper hesitated, then said gently, "His Grace is not an easy man, but he is not a cruel one. Give him time, Your Grace. Men often come around once they have had time to think." After Mrs. Henderson departed, Evelyn sank into a chair by the window and stared out at the gardens below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in this vast house, her husband was going about his business, apparently unaffected by the fact that they had just pledged their lives to each other. How was she to bear this? How was she to spend her days in this gilded cage, married to a man who looked at her with cold suspicion? Mary came to help her dress for dinner, selecting a gown of pale blue silk that set off Evelyn's dark hair and fair skin. "You look lovely, Your Grace," Mary said, using the title for the first time. She had tears in her eyes. "I am so glad I can stay with you in your new home." "I am glad too, Mary," Evelyn replied, squeezing the older woman's hand. "You are my only link to my old life, to happier times." Dinner was an ordeal. She and the Duke sat at opposite ends of a table designed to seat 24, with a dozen footmen standing at attention against the walls. They ate course after course of expertly prepared food that tasted like ash in Evelyn's mouth. The Duke spoke only to comment on estate business or to ask perfunctory questions about her comfort. His politeness was more cutting than rudeness would have been. After dinner, they retired to the drawing room where coffee was served. The Duke positioned himself behind his newspaper, while Evelyn attempted to read a book, though the words swam before her eyes. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, marking each agonizing minute. When it struck 10, the Duke folded his paper and stood. "It is time to retire," he announced. "I will join you shortly." Evelyn's heart hammered as she made her way to her chambers. Mary helped her into a nightgown of fine white lawn, embroidered with flowers and edged with lace. It had been part of her trousseau, selected by a modiste, who had winked and said it would drive any husband mad with desire. But Evelyn doubted anything could penetrate the Duke's armor of ice. She was sitting at her dressing table, brushing her hair, when the connecting door opened and Edward entered. He wore a burgundy dressing gown over his nightshirt, his dark hair slightly disheveled. In the candlelight he looked younger, more vulnerable, but his expression remained guarded. "I will endeavor to be quick," he said, his voice flat. "I have no wish to distress you." He approached the bed with all the enthusiasm of a man facing execution. Evelyn stood, her hands trembling slightly, and allowed him to guide her to the bed. What followed was perfunctory, almost clinical. He performed what he clearly saw as his duty with mechanical efficiency, showing neither passion nor tenderness. When it was over, he withdrew immediately, not meeting her eyes. "Good night, madam," he said formally, already moving toward the connecting door. "Edward, wait," Evelyn called out, pulling the sheet up to cover herself. "Must it be like this between us? Can we not at least try to—" "This is how it will be," he interrupted, pausing at the door. "Do not hope for more. I'm not a man who gives his heart, and even if I were, I would not give it to someone I cannot trust." He left, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo with finality. Evelyn lay in the darkness, tears streaming down her face, mourning not just for what she had lost, but for what she had never had and likely never would. The following days settled into a routine that was as predictable as it was painful. The Duke took breakfast with her in the morning room, reading his correspondence while she picked at toast and tried not to watch him. They would discuss the day's plans. There were calls to be made, invitations to be answered, the business of society to be conducted. He was scrupulously polite, treating her with the courtesy he might show any well-bred lady, but there was no warmth, no hint that she was anything more to him than an obligation to be managed. During the days, Evelyn explored her new home, familiarizing herself with the countless rooms and corridors of Ashbourne House. The library became her favorite refuge, 3 stories of books from floor to ceiling, with rolling ladders to reach the highest shelves. She found solace among the volumes of poetry and history, losing herself in other worlds, other times. It was in the library that she encountered the Duke unexpectedly one afternoon. She had thought him out on business, but there he was, seated in a leather chair by the window, a book of poetry open in his hands. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his face before the mask descended once more. "I apologize," Evelyn said, already backing toward the door. "I did not know you were here. I will leave you in peace." "There is no need," Edward said, closing the book. "This is your home now. You have every right to be here." Evelyn hesitated, then moved toward the shelves, selecting a volume at random. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he watched her with those storm-grey eyes. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. "What are you reading?" she asked finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer. He glanced at the book in his hands. "Wordsworth. Do you know his work?" "Some of it. I prefer Coleridge myself." Something sparked in his eyes. Interest, perhaps, or surprise. "The Rime of the Ancient Mariner?" "And Kubla Khan. There is something haunting about his imagery, the way he captures both beauty and darkness." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Evelyn thought she saw a crack in his armor. Then he stood abruptly, tucking the book under his arm. "I have business to attend to," he said, already moving toward the door. "Enjoy your reading, madam." And just like that, the moment was gone. The evenings were perhaps the worst. They dined together, attended the opera or balls as required by their position, and then retired to their separate chambers. Every few nights, Edward would come to her bed, performing his duty with the same mechanical efficiency as the first time. Evelyn tried not to flinch from his touch, tried to find some spark of connection in these intimate moments, but there was nothing. It was as though he had erected a wall around himself, and she was battering against it in vain. 2 weeks into their marriage, everything changed. It was over breakfast that Edward made his announcement. He set down his coffee cup with careful precision and said, "I must travel to the northern estates. There are matters requiring my attention." Evelyn looked up from her untouched eggs. "How long will you be away?" "A few weeks, perhaps longer. The steward reports difficulties with the tenants that cannot be resolved through correspondence." "I see." She tried to keep her voice steady. "When do you depart?" "This afternoon. I have already given instructions to the staff regarding your needs in my absence. Mrs. Henderson will attend to anything you require." "Might I accompany you?" The words were out before Evelyn could stop them. "I should like to see the estates, to meet the tenants." Edward's face hardened. "That will not be necessary. You will remain here in London where you belong." "But surely as your wife I should—" "You are my wife in name only," he said coldly, rising from the table. "Do not presume to overstep your position." The words struck like a physical blow. Evelyn sat frozen as he strode from the room, the breakfast dishes rattling on the table from the force with which he had pushed back his chair. She did not see him again before he left. From her window she watched his carriage roll away down the street, taking with it any small hope she had harbored that their marriage might improve. The house seemed even larger and emptier with him gone, though she told herself it should feel freer. The first few days passed slowly. Evelyn occupied herself with household matters, meeting with Mrs. Henderson to discuss menus and supplies. She paid calls on a few ladies she had known before her marriage, though the visits were awkward, full of carefully worded questions about her new life and thinly veiled curiosity about the Duke's absence so soon after the wedding. She wrote to Edward, careful letters inquiring about his journey and the estates. She sent them through the household steward, Mr. Parsons, who assured her they would be forwarded to His Grace immediately. No reply came. After a week, she wrote again. Still nothing. After 2 weeks, Evelyn began to understand that Edward did not intend to respond. The realization was crushing. She had known their marriage was cold, but this complete silence was a deeper rejection than she had imagined possible. It was as though he had erased her from his life entirely. It was Mrs. Henderson who finally enlightened her to the truth, finding Evelyn alone in the morning room, staring at yet another letter she had written but not yet sent. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said gently, closing the door behind her. "Forgive me for speaking plainly, but I cannot bear to see you suffering like this." Evelyn looked up, surprised by the woman's familiar tone. "I am not suffering, Mrs. Henderson. I am merely adjusting to my new circumstances." "Your Grace, the Duke is not at the northern estates." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "He is here in London, Your Grace. At Thornton House, his other residence in Bloomsbury. He never left the city." The room seemed to tilt around her. "But he told me he had to attend to estate business." Mrs. Henderson's face was full of pity. "I know what he told you, Your Grace, but Mr. Parsons heard from the staff at Thornton House. His Grace has been in residence there since the day he departed from here. I am so sorry to be the bearer of such news." Evelyn stood on shaking legs, moving to the window as though she could see across London to where her husband was living his life without her. "Why would he lie? Why would he abandon me like this?" "I do not know, Your Grace, but there has been talk among the staff, gossip from other households. It seems there were rumors before your marriage, suggestions that you had been intimate with another gentleman." "Count Blackwood," Evelyn whispered, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. "My aunt. She must have been the one who told him." "I cannot say for certain, Your Grace, but Lady Hawthorne has been seen in society, speaking to anyone who will listen about your supposed indiscretion. She claims she tried to warn the Duke before the wedding, but that he was too honorable to break the engagement." Evelyn felt fury ignite in her chest, burning away the pain and confusion. Her aunt. The woman who had claimed to care for her, to want to protect her reputation. All the while she had been poisoning Edward against her, spreading lies that would destroy any chance they had at happiness. "The letters I have written," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Have they been delivered to Thornton House?" "Yes, Your Grace, every one of them." So he had received her letters and chosen not to respond. The rejection was complete. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Mrs. Henderson," Evelyn managed. "I appreciate your honesty even though it pains me to hear it." The housekeeper hesitated at the door. "If I may say so, Your Grace, His Grace is making a terrible mistake. You are a good woman, anyone can see that. Whatever lies have been told, the truth will out eventually. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the truth remained buried under layers of gossip and innuendo." Evelyn stayed at Ashbourne House, a ghost haunting rooms that had never truly been hers. She wrote no more letters to Edward, understanding finally that he did not want to hear from her. Society, with its unerring instinct for scandal, seized upon the situation with glee. The Duchess that the Duke could not bear to be near, the cursed bride whose husband had fled after a mere 2 weeks of marriage. The whispers followed Evelyn wherever she went. At the modistes, she heard 2 ladies speaking behind a curtain. "They say he discovered she had been with another man. Imagine coming to the marriage bed already soiled." At the theatre, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, saw the fans flutter as matrons leaned together to share the latest speculation. She held her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, but inside, she was crumbling. Her aunt called frequently, each visit a fresh torment. Lady Hawthorne would sweep into the drawing room, all false sympathy and cutting observations. "My dear Evelyn, you look so pale. This situation must be wearing on you terribly. If only you had been more careful of your reputation before your marriage. I tried to warn you that such friendships with gentlemen could be misconstrued, but you would not listen." "You know very well that nothing improper occurred with Count Blackwood," Evelyn said coldly. "You were there the entire time." "Was I?" Lady Hawthorne's eyebrows rose in feigned surprise. "Memory is such a tricky thing. I recall stepping out at some point, going to my chambers. Who can say what might have transpired in my absence?" "You are lying. You were in the drawing room with us the whole evening." Her aunt smiled, a serpent's expression. "The Duke seems to believe my version of events. And really that is what matters, is it not? You made such a splendid match, Evelyn. It is unfortunate that you could not manage to keep your husband content enough to remain under the same roof." Evelyn had ordered her from the house after that, her voice shaking with rage. But the damage was done. Her aunt had systematically destroyed any chance Evelyn had at happiness, and she had done it with deliberate malice. Summer arrived, bringing heat and the smell of flowers from the gardens. Evelyn took to walking the grounds early in the morning before the sun grew too intense, finding brief respite in the beauty of nature. The roses bloomed in profusion, their scent almost overwhelming. She remembered how her mother had loved roses, had tended them with gentle hands. The memory brought tears that she quickly wiped away. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. But at night, alone in her vast bed, the tears came anyway. She mourned for the marriage that might have been, for the connection she had glimpsed in the library that day when they had spoken of poetry. Most of all, she mourned for the loneliness that stretched before her like an endless desert. She was 21 years old and her life was effectively over. Count Blackwood called one afternoon, his visit causing a stir among the servants. Evelyn received him in the drawing room, conscious of the need for propriety, even though her reputation was already in tatters. "Lady Evelyn, forgive me, Your Grace," the Count said, bowing low. He looked distressed, his usual composure rattled. "I have only just returned from the continent and learned of the rumors that have been circulating. I am appalled. I must speak with the Duke at once and clear your name." "His Grace is not in residence," Evelyn replied, keeping her voice steady. "And I fear he would not listen even if you were to find him. He has made his opinion of me quite clear. But this is outrageous. Nothing occurred during my stay at your home. I was the perfect gentleman, as you were the perfect hostess. Your aunt was present the entire time." "My aunt is the source of the lies," Evelyn said bitterly. "She has told the Duke a very different version of events." The Count's face flushed with anger. "Then she must be made to recant. I shall call upon her immediately." "No." Evelyn held up a hand. "It will do no good. Society has already decided I am guilty. Any attempt to defend me will only make matters worse, suggest that you have something to hide. Your own reputation could be damaged. I care nothing for my reputation compared to the injustice being done to you. But I care about yours, Count Blackwood. You were my father's dear friend. I will not allow you to be dragged into this mess. Promise me you will say nothing, do nothing, let it be." Reluctantly, the Count had agreed, though not before pressing her hand and promising that if she ever needed anything, she had only to send word. After he left, Evelyn felt more alone than ever. Even those who knew the truth could do nothing to help her. Autumn came with its golden leaves and cooling temperatures. Evelyn had been married for 6 months, though she had spent only 2 weeks with her husband. She caught a glimpse of him once, quite by accident. She had been returning from a particularly uncomfortable morning call when her carriage had been stopped by traffic in Piccadilly. Looking out the window, she had seen Edward's distinctive figure entering his club. He had looked well, perhaps a bit thinner, but otherwise unaffected by their separation. The sight of him had made her heart clench with a mixture of longing and anger. She continued to manage the household with Mrs. Henderson's help, learning the intricacies of running a large establishment. It gave her something to focus on, a purpose beyond simply existing. The servants grew to respect her quiet efficiency, her kindness to them, her refusal to take out her unhappiness on those around her. But the loneliness remained, a constant ache that no amount of activity could ease. She was a wife, but not a wife, a duchess in name only, living in a magnificent house that felt more like a prison with each passing day. Winter descended upon London with unusual ferocity. Snow blanketed the streets, and ice formed on the windows of Ashbourne House. Evelyn watched the world turn white from her window, feeling as though the cold had seeped into her very bones. Christmas approached, that season of joy and family, and she had neither. The servants decorated the house dutifully, hanging greenery and lighting candles, but the festivities felt hollow without anyone to share them with. On Christmas Eve, Evelyn sat alone in the drawing room, a small fire crackling in the grate. Mrs. Henderson had offered to keep her company, but Evelyn had sent her away wanting to be alone with her thoughts. She had a letter in her lap, one she had written to Edward weeks ago, but never sent. It was different from the others, less pleading, more honest. "I do not know if you will ever read this," she had written, "or if you even care what I have to say. But I need to write it nonetheless, if only to preserve my own sanity. I am innocent of the charges laid against me. I have never been unfaithful to you, not in thought or deed. Count Blackwood is nothing more than a friend of my late father, and the night he spent in my home was completely proper, with my aunt as witness the entire time. That she has chosen to lie about what she saw is a reflection of her character, not mine. I understand that you do not trust me, that perhaps you cannot. But I wanted you to know that somewhere in this vast, cold city, there is a woman who entered into marriage with you in good faith, who has tried to be a good wife, despite receiving nothing but coldness in return. I do not ask for your love. I do not even ask for your affection, but I did hope, perhaps foolishly, for basic respect and the benefit of the doubt. It seems I was wrong to hope for even that much. I wish you well, Edward. I hope that whatever demons chase you find some peace eventually. As for me, I will continue to do my duty as your Duchess, will manage your household and uphold your name in society, because that is what honor demands. But do not mistake duty for happiness, or compliance for forgiveness. You have wounded me deeply, and that wound will not heal simply because time passes." She had folded the letter carefully, sealed it, written his name on the outside. But she could not bring herself to send it. What was the point? He had made his position clear through his silence, his absence. One more letter would change nothing. As midnight approached, Evelyn heard the bells of London's churches ringing out Christmas. She thought of her parents, wondered if they were together somewhere beyond this mortal realm, if they could see what had become of their daughter. She hoped not. The thought of their disappointment was more than she could bear. The new year arrived with little fanfare. Evelyn made resolutions, as people do, promising herself she would find ways to fill her days with meaning, would not allow this situation to destroy her completely. She began to take more interest in charitable works, using some of her pin money to support a foundling home in the East End. The work gave her purpose, allowed her to focus on others rather than dwelling on her own misery. It was during one of her visits to the foundling home that she met Mrs. Sarah Blackwell, the widow who ran the establishment. Mrs. Blackwell was a woman of middle years with a practical manner and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Your Grace is most generous," Mrs. Blackwell said as Evelyn distributed warm blankets to the children. "These little ones have so few benefactors. Most of society prefers not to think about what happens to children born outside of wedlock." "I understand what it is to feel abandoned," Evelyn replied, surprising herself with her honesty. "Perhaps not in the same way as these children, but I know something of loneliness and rejection." Mrs. Blackwell gave her a penetrating look. "Forgive me for speaking plainly, Your Grace, but there has been talk about your situation, about the Duke." Evelyn stiffened. Even here, in this place far from Mayfair's drawing rooms, the gossip had reached. "I do not listen to gossip, Mrs. Blackwell continued, because I know how cruel and false it can be. I see a young woman doing good works, showing kindness to those who have nothing. That tells me more about your character than all the whispers in London." The words brought unexpected tears to Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You cannot know how much I needed to hear that." From that day forward, Evelyn spent more time at the foundling home, finding solace in the innocent faces of the children, in the satisfaction of making a tangible difference in their lives. She read to them, taught the older girls needlework, and sometimes just held the smallest ones, rocking them while they slept. In their need, she found her own need for purpose fulfilled. But the ache of her failed marriage remained, a constant shadow over even her brightest moments. At night, lying in her empty bed, she would sometimes allow herself to imagine a different life, one where Edward had believed her, had loved her, had been the husband she had hoped for during those brief 2 weeks of their marriage. The fantasy was both comfort and torture. Spring returned, bringing with it the season's first flowers and warmer temperatures. It had been a year since Evelyn's wedding, a year since her life had been turned upside down. She stood in the garden one morning, watching the gardeners tend the roses that were just beginning to bud, and made a decision. She could not continue like this, living in limbo, neither wife nor widow, trapped in a marriage that existed only on paper. She needed answers, needed to face Edward directly and demand the truth from him. Even if he rejected her to her face, even if he confirmed that their marriage was truly over, it would be better than this endless uncertainty. "Mrs. Henderson," she called, finding the housekeeper in the linen room, "I need you to prepare a traveling case for me. I am going to Thornton House." The older woman's eyes widened. "Your Grace, are you certain that is wise? Perhaps you should write to His Grace first. Request an audience." "I have written to him countless times with no response. No, I must do this in person. I must look him in the eye and hear from his own lips why he has treated me this way. Let me at least send word ahead. No, I want him to have no warning, no time to prepare excuses or refuse to see me. I am still his wife, Mrs. Henderson. I have every right to call upon my own husband." The housekeeper nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Grace, you do indeed. I will have everything ready within the hour." As Evelyn waited for the preparations to be completed, she felt a mixture of terror and determination. She had been passive for too long, had accepted her exile without truly fighting back. But that was over now. Whatever the outcome of this confrontation, at least she would know where she stood. At least she would have tried. She dressed carefully for the visit, choosing a gown of deep emerald that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. Mary arranged her hair in an elegant style, and Evelyn pinned on a bonnet trimmed with matching ribbon. She looked every inch the Duchess of Ashbourne, and that was precisely the image she needed to project. The carriage ride across London felt interminable. Evelyn watched the streets pass by, moving from the elegant squares of Mayfair through increasingly modest neighbourhoods until they reached Bloomsbury. Thornton House was smaller than Ashbourne House, a comfortable 3-story building of red brick with white-painted windowsills. It looked like the sort of place where a gentleman might be happy, unpretentious and welcoming. As the carriage drew to a stop, Evelyn saw movement at one of the upper windows. A figure stood there, watching. Even from this distance, she recognized the shape of her husband's shoulders, the way he held himself. Edward. He was there, and he had seen her arrive. For a moment, her courage nearly failed. What if he refused to see her? What if he had her turned away at the door like an unwelcome peddler? But no, she was the Duchess of Ashbourne. She would not be dismissed so easily. She descended from the carriage with as much grace as she could muster, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The footman handed her down, and she approached the front door with her head held high. The butler who answered looked startled, his professional composure slipping for just a moment. He was an older man with grey hair and the bearing of someone who had been in service for decades. "Your Grace," he exclaimed, bowing hastily, "we were not informed of your visit. I shall tell His Grace immediately." "That will not be necessary," Evelyn said, stepping past him into the entrance hall. "I know my way." It was a lie. She had never been to Thornton House before, but she said it with such confidence that the butler seemed uncertain how to respond. Before he could protest, Evelyn heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Edward descending. He had changed in the year of their separation, she saw immediately. He looked older, harder, with lines of tension around his mouth and shadows beneath his eyes. His hair was longer than he usually wore it, curling over his collar in a way that would have looked raffish on another man, but only made him appear weary. He was dressed casually in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, as though he had been working in his study, and the informal attire made him seem more human, less the cold duke who had abandoned her. For a long moment they simply stared at each other across the entrance hall. Evelyn saw a dozen emotions flicker across Edward's face, surprise certainly, but also something that might have been guilt, or even longing. Then his expression closed down, became the familiar mask of aristocratic indifference. "Evelyn," he said, and her name on his lips after so long sent a shiver through her. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "We need to talk, Edward. Or should I say, Your Grace? I can never remember what the proper etiquette is when one's husband has been treating one as though one does not exist." A flash of something, pain, anger, crossed his face. "Perhaps we should speak in private, the study." He gestured toward a door off the entrance hall, and Evelyn preceded him into the room. It was a comfortable space, lined with books and smelling of leather and pipe tobacco. A fire burned in the grate despite the mild spring weather, and papers were scattered across the desk as though Edward had been in the middle of working when she arrived. Edward closed the door behind them and moved to stand behind his desk, putting furniture between them as he had done so often during their brief time together. The gesture was not lost on Evelyn. He was protecting himself, keeping her at a distance. "You should not have come," he said, his voice flat. "You gave me no choice. You have ignored my letters, refused to acknowledge my existence for an entire year. What did you expect me to do, simply accept being cast aside without explanation? I thought I had made my position clear. You made nothing clear." Evelyn's control began to slip, and she let the anger and hurt pour out. "You heard rumors. You believed them without even giving me a chance to defend myself, and then you abandoned me. Do you have any idea what this year has been like for me? To be the subject of every gossip in London, to be pitied and whispered about, to be completely alone." Edward's jaw tightened. "You were not alone. You had the house, the servants, everything you could possibly need, everything except my husband, everything except basic human dignity and respect." She moved closer to the desk, her hands clenched at her sides. "You owe me an explanation, Edward. You owe me at least that much." He turned away, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher. "What explanation do you want? You know why I left. You know what I was told about you and Count Blackwood. And you believed it without question, without even asking me for the truth. Multiple people confirmed multiple people?" Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Or one person, repeated by multiple gossips? Tell me, Edward, who first told you about this supposed affair? Who planted that poison in your mind?" He hesitated, and she saw the answer in his face before he spoke. "Your aunt. Lady Hawthorne came to me 2 days before our wedding. She was weeping, said it broke her heart to tell me, but that she felt obligated to warn me. She said she had seen you and Count Blackwood in compromising circumstances. And you believed her. She had no reason to lie." "No reason?" Evelyn's voice rose. "She had every reason. She was jealous of me, Edward. Jealous of my marriage to you. Jealous of the life I was going to have. She wanted to destroy me, and you handed her the perfect weapon." "She showed me letters," Edward said quietly. "Letters that appeared to be from Count Blackwood to you, full of intimate details, references to your time together." "Which could easily have been forged," Evelyn interrupted. "Did you ever think of that? Did it occur to you that a woman as vindictive as my aunt might go to such lengths?" Edward turned to face her fully, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. The letters seemed genuine. The handwriting could have been copied, could have been written by someone paid to imitate his hand. "Edward, I am telling you that nothing happened between Count Blackwood and me. Nothing. He sought shelter during a storm, stayed in a guest room on the opposite end of the house from my chambers, and departed the next morning. My aunt was present the entire time. There were no stolen moments, no secret rendezvous, no affair. It is all lies." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Edward's hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. Evelyn could see the war playing out across his face, the desire to believe her fighting against the walls he had built to protect himself. "Even if what you say is true," he said finally, his voice strained, "even if your aunt did lie, how can I trust you? How can I know for certain?" "You could start by asking Count Blackwood himself," Evelyn challenged. "Bring him here. Question him directly. Surely his word carries some weight with you. Count Blackwood would naturally defend you. Or he could tell the truth," Evelyn was shouting now, past caring about propriety or composure. "But you do not want the truth, do you, Edward? You want to believe the worst of me because that is easier than taking a risk, easier than allowing yourself to care about someone who might hurt you." "You do not know what you are talking about," Edward said, but there was no force behind the words. "Do I not?" Evelyn moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. She was close enough now to see the pulse beating in his throat, to smell the scent of his cologne mixed with smoke from the fire. "I think I understand you better than you want to admit. You are afraid, Edward. Afraid to trust, afraid to love, afraid to be vulnerable. So when my aunt gave you an excuse to push me away, you seized it eagerly. It did not matter whether it was true or not. It gave you permission to keep your heart safe." Edward's eyes blazed with sudden emotion. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed casting you aside?" "I do not know what you wanted. You never gave me the chance to find out. I wanted—" He broke off, turning away sharply. "It does not matter what I wanted. It matters to me," Evelyn said more quietly. "Tell me, Edward. Tell me the truth for once." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly he began to speak, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "My father betrayed my mother. For years everyone in society knew he had a mistress, that he kept her in a house in Chelsea and visited her regularly. Everyone knew except my mother, or perhaps she knew but pretended not to. She loved him, you see, loved him with her whole heart. And when she finally learned the truth, when someone was cruel enough to tell her about the other woman, about the children my father had with her, it destroyed her." Evelyn stood very still, listening. "She withered away like a flower deprived of sun," Edward continued. "Stopped eating, stopped leaving her rooms. The doctors could find nothing physically wrong with her, but she died nonetheless. Of a broken heart, they said. And my father, he attended her funeral, played the grieving widower and went right back to his mistress the following week." "Edward," Evelyn whispered, beginning to understand, "I was 15 when she died, old enough to understand what had happened, what he had done to her. I swore I would never be like him, would never give someone that power over me. I swore I would never love someone who could destroy me the way my mother was destroyed. So when you heard the rumors about me, I wanted to believe them," Edward finished, finally turning to face her. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because if you were unfaithful, if you were deceitful, then I had justification for keeping my distance. I would never risk caring for you if I convinced myself you were unworthy of being cared for." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, in a way nothing between them had ever been before. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her own face, though she could not have said whether they were tears of sadness or anger or something else entirely. "But I was not unfaithful," she said softly. "I was not deceitful. I came to our marriage in good faith, Edward. I was ready to be a good wife to you, to try to build something real between us despite the arranged nature of our union. And you threw that away based on lies." "I know," Edward said, his voice breaking. "God help me, I think I have known for months now. I have had investigators looking into the matter, and everything they have found suggests you are telling the truth. Count Blackwood is a man of impeccable reputation. The servants who were present at your home that night all confirm that nothing improper occurred, even the letters your aunt showed me. My investigators believe they are forgeries, written by someone she paid to imitate the Count's hand." "You knew," Evelyn repeated, the words like stones in her mouth. "You knew I was innocent and still you stayed away." "I did not know what to do, how to fix what I had broken. Every day I told myself I would go to you, would apologize, would try to make things right. And every day I convinced myself it was too late, that you would never forgive me." "You were right about that," Evelyn said coldly. "I do not know if I can forgive you. You took a year of my life, Edward, a year of loneliness and humiliation and pain. You made me the laughingstock of London society. You treated me like I was nothing, less than nothing. I know, and I am—" He seemed to struggle with the words, as though he had never said them before. "I am sorry, more sorry than I have words to express." "Sorry," Evelyn repeated flatly. "You think that is enough? You think sorry can undo a year of suffering?" No, of course not. I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I will arrange for an annulment if you wish it. You should not be bound to a man who has treated you so abominably." The offer should have filled Evelyn with relief, freedom from this mockery of a marriage, the chance to start over, perhaps find someone who would actually care for her. But instead she felt a strange emptiness. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "To be free of me." Edward looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw a truth he had been hiding, perhaps even from himself. "No," he said hoarsely. "No, that is not what I want at all. But it does not matter what I want. I have forfeited any right to ask anything of you." "Then what do you want, Edward? Say it plainly." He moved closer to her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "I want another chance. I want to start over, to do things properly this time. I want—" He swallowed hard. "I want to be the husband you deserved from the beginning. But I know I do not deserve that chance. I know I have hurt you too deeply." Evelyn stared up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his face, the genuine remorse. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to make him suffer as she had suffered. But another part, a part she had tried to suppress during the long months of separation, remembered those brief moments of connection they had shared. The conversation about poetry in the library, the way his eyes had softened, just for an instant, during their wedding ceremony. "I will not lie and say I forgive you," she said slowly. "I do not. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But I am willing to hear what you have to say. I am willing to listen to your side of things." Hope flickered across Edward's face, fragile and uncertain. "That is more than I deserve." "Yes, it is. Now, you said you were having me investigated. I want to know everything. I want to see every report, every piece of evidence. And I want you to send for Count Blackwood and my aunt. I want this resolved completely with witnesses so there can be no more doubt." "I will send for them immediately," Edward agreed. "Though I warn you, your aunt will not come willingly. Then have her dragged here if necessary. I am done being the victim in this farce, Edward. If we are to have any chance at all, I need complete vindication. I need everyone who spread those lies to recant them publicly. It will be done." They stood facing each other in the study, two people who had been strangers thrown together by duty, then torn apart by lies and fear. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, was not quickly mended. But for the first time in a year, Evelyn felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "I'm staying," she announced. "I will not return to Ashbourne House tonight. I will remain here while we sort this out." Edward's eyes widened. "Evelyn, that would be highly improper." "We are married," she interrupted. "It is perfectly proper for me to stay in my husband's residence, unless you intend to turn me away." "No, of course not. You are welcome here. I just thought, after everything, I'm tired of being separated from my own husband," Evelyn said firmly. "Now, are you going to send those messages? Or shall I do it myself?" A ghost of a smile touched Edward's lips, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "I will do it. Make yourself comfortable. Mrs. Morris, the housekeeper here, will show you to a room." As Edward moved to his desk to write the necessary letters, Evelyn felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease slightly. This was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning, and after a year of nothing, a beginning felt like everything. The housekeeper, Mrs. Morris, was a plump woman with rosy cheeks and a kindly manner. She showed no surprise at Evelyn's unexpected presence, though her eyes held a knowing sympathy that suggested she understood more than she said. "This way, Your Grace," she said, leading Evelyn up the stairs. "I will have the best guest room prepared for you. It has a lovely view of the square." "Thank you, Mrs. Morris. I appreciate your hospitality on such short notice." The room was indeed lovely, decorated in soft yellows and whites, with furnishings that were comfortable rather than ostentatious. It was a room designed for comfort, not display, and Evelyn found herself appreciating the difference from the grand but impersonal chambers at Ashbourne House. Mary had accompanied her in the carriage, and now set about unpacking the small case they had brought. "What do you think will happen, Your Grace?" the maid asked quietly, as she hung gowns in the wardrobe. "I do not know, Mary, but I needed answers, and I intend to get them." That afternoon, Count Blackwood arrived first, responding to Edward's urgent summons with admirable promptness. Evelyn received him in the drawing-room with Edward present, and the Count's confusion was evident. Your Grace, he greeted them both, bowing. "I confess I am bewildered by this summons. Has something happened?" "Something happened a year ago," Edward said, his voice controlled but with an edge to it. "I need you to tell me, on your honor as a gentleman, the precise nature of your relationship with my wife." The Count's face flushed with anger. "I have already explained this to Her Grace months ago when I learned of the vicious rumors. There is no relationship beyond friendship through her late father. I knew Lord Pemberton for 20 years, and I called upon Lady Evelyn, as she was then, to offer my condolences after his death. You stayed at her home overnight. During a severe storm, yes, I was offered hospitality, which I accepted as any sensible person would have done. Lady Evelyn's aunt, Lady Hawthorne, was present as chaperone throughout my visit. I spent the night in a guest room far from the family quarters, departed at first light, and have not been alone with Her Grace before or since." Edward's expression was unreadable. Lady Hawthorne told a very different story. She suggested there were intimacies between you. The Count drew himself up to his full height, his eyes flashing. "Then Lady Hawthorne is a liar and a snake. I am a married man with 3 daughters, Your Grace. The eldest is but 2 years younger than your wife. I would no more dishonor Her Grace than I would my own children. If Lady Hawthorne has suggested otherwise, she has done so out of malice, and I demand the opportunity to confront her with her lies." "That opportunity is coming," Edward replied. "Lady Hawthorne has been sent for." "Good, because I will not have my name or Her Grace's name besmirched by such calumny. Your Grace," he turned to Evelyn, "I apologize that my innocent visit has caused you such suffering. Had I known what would result, I would have ridden through the storm rather than seek shelter." "It is not your fault, Count," Evelyn said gently. "The fault lies with those who twisted an innocent situation into something ugly." They did not have long to wait. Within the hour, a carriage arrived bearing Lady Hawthorne. Unlike the Count, who had come willingly, Evelyn's aunt had clearly been given no choice in the matter. Her face was pale with anger as she was shown into the drawing-room, and her eyes darted between the 3 people awaiting her, like a trapped animal seeking escape. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I was practically dragged from my home by your servants, Ashbourne. This is an outrage." "The outrage, Lady Hawthorne, is yours," Edward replied coldly. "You will sit down and answer some questions, truthfully this time." Lady Hawthorne's gaze fell on Count Blackwood, and something like fear flashed across her face. "Why is he here?" "Because you have made accusations about him," Evelyn said, standing to face her aunt directly. "Accusations that have destroyed my marriage and my reputation. It is time for the truth to come out. I told the truth. I told what I saw." "You told lies," Count Blackwood interrupted, his voice like iron. "You claim to have witnessed impropriety where none existed. You have slandered both Her Grace and myself with your fabrications." "I saw what I saw," Lady Hawthorne insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then describe precisely what you saw," Edward commanded. "Leave out no detail. When did these supposed intimacies occur? Where? What exactly did you witness?" Lady Hawthorne's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. It was late in the evening. I heard voices." "You were with us in the drawing-room the entire evening," Evelyn said. "You sat in the chair by the fire and complained of the cold. You never left the room until we all retired for the night." I must have stepped out at some point." "You did not," Count Blackwood stated flatly. "I remember distinctly because you spoke at length about your concerns for your niece's reputation, about how careful young ladies must be. Rather ironic, given what you were planning. This is absurd. Lady Hawthorne's composure was crumbling. I will not be questioned like a common criminal. Then perhaps you should not have acted like one, Edward said, his voice cold as winter. I have had investigators looking into this matter, Lady Hawthorne. Would you like to know what they discovered? The colour drained from Lady Hawthorne's face. Investigators? Indeed, including inquiries into your financial situation. It seems you are deeply in debt, are you not? Your husband's gambling has left you nearly destitute. You were desperate for money, desperate enough to accept payment from certain parties who wish to cause scandal. That is a lie. Is it? My investigators have sworn statements from a scribe in Cheapside who was paid to forge letters in Count Blackwood's handwriting, letters that you then showed to me as proof of an affair. The scribe was most cooperative once we explained the legal consequences of his actions. He was happy to identify the woman who hired him. Lady Hawthorne's face had gone from pale to grey. She swayed on her feet, and for a moment Evelyn thought she might faint. This is preposterous. Furthermore, Edward continued remorselessly, I have statements from your own servants. It seems you have been quite vocal in your jealousy of your niece. One maid in particular remembers you saying, and I quote, Evelyn has always had everything handed to her. It is time she learned what it means to suffer. She deserved it. The words burst from Lady Hawthorne like poison from a lanced boil. She had everything. Beauty, grace, a magnificent marriage. What did I have? A drunkard for a husband and debts I cannot pay. Why should she have such happiness when I have known nothing but misery? The admission hung in the air, ugly and raw. Evelyn felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Anger, yes, but also a strange pity for this bitter woman who had allowed envy to consume her completely. So you destroyed my life out of jealousy, Evelyn said quietly. You ruined my marriage, made me a laughingstock, subjected me to a year of isolation and pain, because you were envious. Lady Hawthorne's eyes glittered with tears and malice. You do not understand. You have never understood. You were always mother's favourite, always so perfect, so beloved. And then you court a duke. A duke, while I am trapped with a title that means nothing and creditors pounding at my door. So this was your revenge, Edward said with disgust. You thought if you could not be happy, neither should she. I thought she deserved to know what real suffering felt like, Lady Hawthorne spat. Instead, she gets to stand here playing the wronged innocent, while I am interrogated like a criminal. You are a criminal, Count Blackwood said coldly. Slander, forgery, defamation of character. Any one of those offences could see you in court, possibly in prison. The threat had its desired effect. Lady Hawthorne seemed to collapse in on herself, sinking into a chair and covering her face with her hands. Please, she whispered, please do not do this. I will do anything. I will tell everyone the truth, will recant everything I said. Just please do not send me to prison. Edward looked at Evelyn, his expression asking for her decision. This was her aunt, her mother's sister. Despite everything, the connection of blood remained, but so did the memory of a year of torment. You will do more than recant, Evelyn said, her voice hard. You will write a detailed confession of everything you have done, the lies you told, the letters you forged, the rumors you spread. You will sign it and have it witnessed. That document will be kept in the Duke's possession as insurance against any future malice on your part. Yes, yes, anything, Lady Hawthorne sobbed. Furthermore, you will leave London, permanently. I never want to see you again. You will live quietly in the country on whatever allowance your husband provides, and you will speak my name to no one. If I hear that you have been spreading gossip about me or anyone in my family, that confession will be made public and legal action will be taken. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. I will do as you say. Then get out of my sight, Evelyn said, surprised by the venom in her own voice. You disgust me. Lady Hawthorne fled the room, her sobs echoing in the hallway. Count Blackwood watched her go with an expression of profound distaste. I am glad that is settled, he said, turning to Evelyn and bowing deeply. Your Grace, you have my deepest admiration for the strength you have shown throughout this ordeal. And Your Grace, he nodded to Edward, I hope you will treat your wife with the respect and affection she deserves. She is a remarkable woman. After the Count departed, Evelyn and Edward found themselves alone in the drawing room once more. The confrontation had left them both drained, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I should have believed you from the beginning," Edward said finally. "I should have asked you for the truth instead of accepting lies from someone I barely knew." "Yes, you should have," Evelyn agreed. There was no point in softening the truth. "You wronged me terribly, Edward, and having your suspicions confirmed does not undo the damage." "I know. What can I do to make amends?" Evelyn considered the question. What did she want from him? An apology he had already given. Grand gestures, promises of love that might prove as false as her aunt's tears. "I want you to tell me about your mother," she said finally. "I want to understand why you were so quick to believe the worst of me. I want to know who you are, Edward. Not the Duke of Ashbourne, but the man behind the title." Edward looked surprised, but he nodded slowly. "Very well, but it is not a pleasant story." They moved to sit by the fire, and Edward began to speak. He told her of his childhood, of a mother who was beautiful and kind, but whose happiness depended entirely on his father's fickle attentions. He described watching her wither as his father's infidelities became more blatant, more public. He spoke of the day his mother finally learned the full extent of her husband's betrayal, that he had another family, children with his mistress who bore his features more strongly than Edward did himself. "She took to her bed after that," Edward said, staring into the flames. "Simply stopped living. The doctors could find nothing wrong physically, but she faded like a flower without water. I was 15, old enough to understand, but too young to help. I sat with her every day, held her hand, begged her to get better. But she did not want to get better. She wanted to die, and eventually she did." "And your father?" Evelyn asked gently. "He attended the funeral, accepted condolences, played the grieving widower with great skill. 3 days later he was back with his mistress. He never showed an ounce of remorse, never acknowledged that he had killed her as surely as if he had put a knife in her heart. He died 5 years later of apoplexy, leaving me everything. The title, the estates, and a legacy of distrust that has poisoned every relationship I have attempted since." "So when you heard the rumors about me?" "I saw history repeating itself. I saw myself in my father's position, being made a fool of by a beautiful woman, and I panicked. I told myself I was being strong, protecting myself from being hurt as my mother was hurt. But really, I was being a coward. I was choosing loneliness over the risk of love." The admission was stark, honest in a way Edward had never been before. Evelyn saw the vulnerability in his face, the pain he had carried for so long. And despite her anger, despite the hurt he had caused her, she felt her heart softening toward him. "Love is a risk," she said softly. "But so is living. We cannot protect ourselves from all pain, Edward. That is not strength. That is merely existence." "I am beginning to understand that." He turned to look at her, and in his grey eyes she saw something she had never seen before. Hope, fragile but real. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know you owe me nothing. But would you be willing to give me another chance? Not immediately, not until you are ready. But someday, perhaps, could you consider allowing me back into your life?" Evelyn studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine remorse. She thought of the years she had spent in exile, the loneliness and pain. She thought of the woman she had become through that suffering, stronger, more self-reliant, less willing to accept mistreatment. That woman would not give in easily, would demand more than pretty words and promises. "I will not lie and say I forgive you," she said carefully. "Forgiveness will take time if it comes at all, but I am willing to try to rebuild what was destroyed. We will start as acquaintances, perhaps become friends. Anything more than that will depend on whether you can prove yourself worthy of my trust." "That is more than I deserve," Edward said, and she could hear the emotion in his voice. "I will spend every day trying to earn that trust. I will show you, through my actions, not just words, that I can be the husband you deserve." "See that you do," Evelyn replied, "because I will not go through another year like the last one. If we cannot make this marriage work, if we cannot find some way to coexist peacefully, then I will seek an annulment or whatever other legal remedy is available. I will not remain in a union that brings me nothing but pain. I understand, and I agree. We will try, truly try to build something real between us, and if we fail, well, then at least we will have tried honestly. They talked long into the evening, a conversation more real and open than any they had shared during their brief time together as newlyweds. Edward told her more about his life, his responsibilities as Duke, the weight of expectations that had been placed on him since childhood. Evelyn spoke of her own life, her parents' deaths, the loneliness she had felt even before their arranged marriage. As the clock struck midnight, Evelyn rose to retire to her room. Edward stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other uncertainly. "Good night, Evelyn," Edward said softly. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Good night, Edward. Do not waste it." The following days were strange, tentative. Evelyn remained at Thornton House and they fell into a new routine. Breakfast together with conversation that was halting at first, but gradually became more natural. Edward showed her his study, the estate books, explaining the business of managing the ducal properties. Evelyn found herself interested, despite herself, asking questions, offering observations. They walked in the square together, Edward offering his arm formally at first, then with more ease as the days passed. They talked about books, about music, about politics and philosophy. Evelyn discovered that beneath the cold exterior, Edward had always shown her was a man of considerable intelligence and, surprisingly, dry wit. When he forgot to guard himself, when he let his defenses down, he could be quite amusing. One afternoon, as they sat in the drawing room reading, a companionable silence having fallen between them, Edward suddenly spoke. "I burned them, you know. The letters your aunt forged." Evelyn looked up from her book. "Did you?" "Yes. They were lies, and I did not want them to exist anymore, did not want any evidence of my foolishness to remain." He paused, then added, "But I kept your letters, the ones you sent to me during our separation. I have them all, tied with ribbon in my desk drawer." "You kept them?" Evelyn was surprised. "Why?" "Because they were real. Because every word you wrote came from genuine emotion, genuine pain. I read them over and over, torturing myself with what I had thrown away. They seemed like penance somehow, a reminder of my failure. May I see them?" Edward hesitated, then nodded. He retrieved a thick bundle of letters from his desk, handing them to Evelyn with something like shame in his expression. She untied the ribbon and began to read, seeing her own handwriting, her own desperate words. The letters chronicled her journey through pain and confusion to a kind of resigned acceptance. The early ones were pleading, begging him to respond, to explain. The middle ones grew more resigned, more formal. The later ones were almost clinical, reports on household matters with no personal content at all. It was like watching herself die on paper. "I should not have sent these," she said quietly. "They make me sound pathetic." "No," Edward said firmly. "They make you sound human. They make you sound like someone trying desperately to salvage something from a terrible situation. There is no shame in that." Evelyn noticed something else, notes in the margins written in Edward's hand, responses to questions she had asked, answers to pleas she had made. He had carried on a one-sided conversation with her through these letters, saying all the things he had been too proud or too afraid to say directly. "You answered them," she said, wonder in her voice. "After a fashion. It was as close as I could come to responding. Every time I considered actually writing to you, fear paralyzed me. What if you rejected me? What if you had stopped caring? It seemed safer to keep my responses private to maintain my isolation. And now? Now I see what a fool I was. Safety is overrated, Evelyn. It is merely another word for loneliness." As weeks passed, something began to shift between them. The careful politeness evolved into genuine warmth. They laughed together, argued playfully about books and ideas, fell into rhythms of companionship that felt natural rather than forced. Edward proved his sincerity through consistent action. He began to pay her compliments, not the empty flattery of society, but genuine observations about her intelligence, her kindness, her strength. He sought her opinion on estate matters and listened carefully to her responses. He introduced her to his close friends, presenting her with pride as his duchess, and watched with approval as she charmed them with her wit and grace. For her part, Evelyn found herself looking forward to their time together. She caught herself watching for Edward's return when he went out on business, felt disappointed when meetings ran long and delayed their usual evening conversation. The physical awareness between them grew stronger too. A brush of hands when passing a book, the feeling of his arm beneath her fingers when they walked, the scent of his cologne when he leaned close to point out something in a text. All these small touches became charged with meaning. One evening, as they sat together in the drawing room after dinner, Edward set aside his newspaper and looked at her seriously. "Evelyn, I have been thinking. Would you object to returning to Ashbourne House, together this time? I thought we might make it truly our home, redecorate if you wish, make it a place that reflects both of us rather than just generations of Thorntons." Evelyn considered the proposal. Ashbourne House held painful memories, but it was also magnificent, with space and grandeur that Thornton House lacked, and the idea of transforming it, of putting her own mark on it, was appealing. "I would like that," she said, "but I have conditions. Name them. I want to say in all household matters, not just the trivial ones. I want to be a true partner in managing our home." "Agreed." "And I want to continue my charitable work with the Foundling Home. It has become important to me." "Of course. I would be honored to support such work." "And," Evelyn took a breath, "I want us to present ourselves to society as a united couple. I want the gossip about us to end, and the only way to do that is to show them that we are together, happy even." Edward smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern face. "I think that can be arranged, though I confess the idea of parading our relationship before the ton is somewhat daunting." "You will manage, Your Grace," Evelyn said, with a teasing tone she would never have dared use months ago. "After all, you have managed far more difficult challenges." They moved back to Ashbourne House the following week. True to his word, Edward gave Evelyn free rein to redecorate as she wished. Together they went through rooms that had not changed in decades, deciding what to keep and what to replace. It became a project they worked on together, debating color schemes and furniture placement, sometimes agreeing, sometimes compromising. The servants noticed the change immediately. The Duke and Duchess, who barely spoke a year ago, now consulted each other constantly, finished each other's sentences, shared private jokes. Mrs. Henderson told Mary, who told Evelyn, that the entire staff was delighted by the transformation. "They always hoped you and His Grace would find happiness together," Mary confided. "They felt so badly for you during that terrible year." Edward also kept his promise about society. They attended balls and soirees together, and he was attentive in ways that set tongues wagging for entirely different reasons than before. He danced with her multiple times at each event, something well beyond what etiquette required. He was seen whispering to her, making her laugh, looking at her with an expression that could only be described as tender. The gossips, always hungry for fresh material, quickly shifted their focus. The cursed bride became the cherished duchess. Stories circulated about how the Duke had fallen desperately in love with his wife and could not bear to be parted from her. Some of the tales were wildly inaccurate, but Edward and Evelyn found them amusing rather than annoying. "Apparently," Edward told her one evening after a particularly gossip-filled ball, "I wrote you 300 love sonnets during our separation and have been reciting them to you nightly." Evelyn laughed. "Only 300? How unromantic of you." "I shall endeavour to do better. Perhaps I should aim for 400. "Make it 500 and I might consider forgiving you for last year," Evelyn teased, then stopped, realizing what she had said. I did not mean..." But Edward was smiling. "So you are considering forgiveness? That is progress." And it was. Slowly, painfully slowly sometimes, Evelyn found her anger softening. Edward's consistent kindness, his obvious remorse, his determination to be better, all of it was wearing down her resistance. She began to see him not as the cold duke who had abandoned her, but as a damaged man who had been trying desperately to protect himself from pain and had nearly destroyed both of them in the process. The change in her feelings manifested in small ways. She found herself touching his arm more often, seeking his company when he was away even briefly, feeling a warmth in her chest when he smiled at her. It was not the passionate love of novels and poetry, but something perhaps more real, a growing affection built on mutual respect and understanding. One night, nearly 3 months after their confrontation at Thornton House, Edward came to her door. They had been sleeping in separate chambers, maintaining propriety despite living together, but now he stood there in his dressing gown, looking uncertain. "I do not expect anything," he said quickly. "I know we are not. That is, I understand if you are not ready, but I hoped we might talk, just talk." Evelyn stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They sat together on the settee by the fire, and Edward took her hand gently. "I want you to know," he said, "that these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, truly know you, has been a revelation. You are everything I did not know I wanted. Intelligent, kind, strong, funny. I do not deserve you, but I am grateful beyond words that you have given me this chance." "Edward," Evelyn whispered, feeling tears prick her eyes, "let me finish. I have been thinking about what you said, about love being a risk. You were right. And I have been a coward for so long, afraid to take that risk. But I cannot be a coward anymore. I love you, Evelyn. I think I have loved you since I first saw you, though I was too damaged to recognize it. I love your courage and your compassion. I love the way you bite your lip when you are thinking. I love how you champion those foundling children with such fierce dedication. I love you, and I needed you to know that, even if you are not ready to hear it." The tears were flowing freely now. Evelyn looked at this man who had hurt her so badly, who had worked so hard to make amends, who was offering her his heart with shaking hands. "I do not know if I love you yet," she said honestly. "But I think I am beginning to. These months with you have shown me who you really are, not the mask you wore before. And I like what I see. More than like." "That is enough," Edward said, relief evident in his voice. "That is more than enough. But I need you to understand something," Evelyn continued. "If we do this, if we truly try to make this marriage real, there can be no more secrets, no more walls. We must be honest with each other, even when it is difficult." "I agree. Complete honesty from now on." "Then stay tonight," Evelyn said softly. Not for duty. Just stay. Sleep beside me. Let us start again, properly this time." Edward's eyes widened, then softened with emotion. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." That night they lay together in Evelyn's bed, simply holding each other. There was no passion, not yet, but there was something perhaps more important. Comfort, companionship, the beginning of real intimacy. Edward told her more stories of his childhood, and Evelyn shared memories of her parents she had not spoken of in years. They talked until the candles burned low, and sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms. When Evelyn woke the next morning, Edward was still there, his face peaceful in sleep. She studied him in the early morning light, the lines around his eyes, the slight grey threading his dark hair, the vulnerability that showed only when his guard was down. This man had broken her heart, but he was trying so hard to mend it. Perhaps that was what love was in the end, not perfection, but the willingness to keep trying despite failure. The months that followed brought continued healing and growth. Edward began to take Evelyn to the estates, introducing her to the tenants and stewards, allowing her to see the full scope of what being the Duchess of Ashbourne truly meant. She threw herself into the role with enthusiasm, implementing changes that improved tenant conditions and earning their respect through her genuine interest in their welfare. She continued her work with the foundling home, and Edward began to accompany her, bringing donations and even sitting with the children while she taught them letters. Watching him read to a small boy who had never known a father, Evelyn felt something in her chest crack open, and she realized with a start that she did love him. When precisely affection had turned to love, she could not say. But it was there, warm and real and growing stronger each day. She did not tell him immediately. Some instinct made her hold the words back, wanting to be absolutely certain, wanting to choose the perfect moment. But Edward seemed to sense the shift in her feelings. His touches became more confident, less tentative. He kissed her forehead, when he thought she was not paying attention. He looked at her with such naked adoration sometimes that it made her breath catch. It was the anniversary of their wedding, a day she had dreaded when it appeared on the calendar, that everything came to a head. Edward had planned an intimate dinner, just the two of them, in the small family dining room, rather than the formal one they usually used. The table was set with candles and flowers, and Edward had personally selected each course from her favorite dishes. As they ate and talked, Evelyn felt her heart swelling with emotion. This man, who had once seemed so cold and unreachable, had become the center of her world. After dinner, Edward produced a small velvet box. "I have something for you. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a ring, a simple band of gold engraved with words in Latin. "What does it say?" Evelyn asked. "Fides et amor," Edward translated. "Faith and love. I had it made as a symbol of our new beginning. The first time we married, I gave you nothing, not even my trust. This time I want to give you everything." He slipped the ring onto her finger above her wedding band, and Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you," she said, the words finally breaking free. "I fought against it, did not want to feel it, but I do. I love you, Edward. Not despite what happened between us, but perhaps because of it. We have been tested in fire, and we survived." Edward pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She could feel him trembling, could hear the catch in his breathing that suggested he was fighting tears of his own. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing who I could be, instead of just who I was." That night they came together again as husband and wife, but this time it was different. There was passion, yes, but also tenderness and joy. They made love slowly, taking time to explore and discover each other, whispering words of affection and promise. When it was over, they lay tangled together, both sated and content in a way neither had experienced before. "I wish we could have had this from the beginning," Evelyn murmured against his chest. "We were not ready for it then," Edward replied, stroking her hair. "I certainly was not. I needed to be broken down and rebuilt. It was painful, but perhaps necessary. Do you think we would have found our way here eventually, even without my aunt's interference?" Edward considered the question. "I would like to think so, but honestly I do not know. I was so determined to keep you at a distance. It might have taken years, or it might never have happened at all. In a strange way, perhaps we owe Lady Hawthorne a debt of gratitude." "I would not go that far," Evelyn said dryly, "but I understand what you mean. The crisis forced us to confront things we might have ignored indefinitely." Spring arrived again, marking 2 years since their wedding. This time the season brought joy instead of pain. Evelyn discovered she was with child, news that sent Edward into a state of anxious excitement. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, that she not overexert herself, driving her to affectionate exasperation. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time, Edward," she told him, when he tried to prevent her from climbing stairs. "I am perfectly healthy." "You are carrying my child," he replied. "My child and yours. Nothing is more precious to me than your safety and well-being." Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn day, arriving with a lusty cry that made everyone in the birthing room laugh with relief. Edward was there, shocking the midwife but insisted upon by Evelyn, and when he held his daughter for the first time, Evelyn saw tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named her Catherine, after Edward's mother, but with a second name of Caroline after Evelyn's. It was a blending of their two families, a symbol of the unity they had built from the ruins of their terrible beginning. As Evelyn recovered from the birth, lying in her bed with Edward beside her and their daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle, she reflected on the journey they had taken. From strangers bound by duty, to enemies separated by lies, to lovers united by choice. It had been a long and painful road. "Do you ever regret it?" Edward asked quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "Regret giving me another chance?" "Sometimes I regret the pain we both went through," Evelyn replied honestly. "But I do not regret where we ended up. We earned this happiness, Edward. We fought for it, both of us. That makes it more precious than if it had come easily. The years that followed were not without challenges. They argued sometimes, had disagreements about estate management or child-rearing or social obligations, but they had learned how to communicate, how to work through difficulties without letting them fester. The foundation of trust they had built was strong enough to weather the inevitable storms of marriage. They had 3 more children, 2 sons and another daughter. Edward was a devoted father, determined not to repeat his own father's mistakes. He spent hours with the children, reading to them, teaching them, showing them affection that had been denied him in his own childhood. Evelyn watched him play with their children in the garden one afternoon, their laughter ringing through the air, and felt her heart swell with contentment. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark days of exile. Not just a husband, but a partner, a friend, a man who loved her and showed it every day through word and deed. The foundling home continued to thrive under her patronage, and Edward had become one of its most generous supporters. They had established a fund to help the children learn trades, giving them opportunities they would never have had otherwise. Several of the older children had written to thank her, their careful letters full of hope for futures that now seemed possible. One evening, many years after that first terrible year of their marriage, Evelyn sat in the library at Ashbourne House, now truly her home in every sense. She was reading a new novel that had been recommended by Mrs. Blackwell, a story of misunderstandings and eventual love between 2 people from different classes. The book was called Pride and Prejudice, and Evelyn found herself seeing parallels to her own life in its pages. Edward entered the library, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "What are you reading?" "A novel by a Miss Austen. It is quite clever, actually. The heroine misjudges the hero terribly at first, thinks him proud and arrogant, while he thinks her beneath him. But through a series of events, they come to see each other's true characters and fall in love." "Sounds familiar," Edward said with a wry smile. "Though, in our case, I was the one who misjudged you." "You were proud and arrogant, though," Evelyn teased. "So the parallel holds." "I cannot argue with that." He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the years. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 times. You are falling behind your usual count." "Then let me remedy that. I love you, Evelyn Thornton, Duchess of Ashbourne. I love you more than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Evelyn set her book aside and moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "And I love you, you foolish, wonderful man, even when you are being absurd and romantic." "Especially when I am being absurd and romantic," Edward corrected, pulling her close for a kiss. Later that night, as they lay together in the bed they now shared every night, Evelyn thought about the book she had been reading. The story had a happy ending, the lovers united after overcoming misunderstandings and social barriers, but it was fiction, a fantasy. Real life was messier, more complicated, more painful. Real love required work, required forgiveness, required the courage to be vulnerable even after being hurt. She and Edward had found their happy ending, but it had not come easily. They had earned it through honesty, through the willingness to change, through the determination to try even when failure seemed certain. That, she thought, was the real romance. Not the swept-away passion of novels, but the steady, enduring love built on friendship and respect and hard-won trust. "What are you thinking about?" Edward murmured sleepily beside her. "About how far we have come, about how different our life is now from what it was. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of that time, even with all its pain?" Evelyn considered the question seriously. "No, I do not miss the pain or the loneliness, but I am grateful for what it taught us. We would not appreciate what we have now if we had not suffered for it." "Wise words, my love." Edward pulled her closer, and Evelyn felt the familiar comfort of his presence, the security of knowing she was loved completely and without reservation. The following morning, Evelyn received an unexpected visitor. Count Blackwood called at Ashbourne House, his face grave with news. He was shown into the morning room where Evelyn was going through correspondence. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "Forgive the intrusion, but I felt you should know. Lady Hawthorne has died." Evelyn set down her pen, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. How? A fever, apparently. She had been living in reduced circumstances in Yorkshire, as per the terms of your agreement. The local vicar wrote to inform any family. As far as I know, you are her only living relation. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, remembering her aunt, the bitterness, the jealousy, the malice that had nearly destroyed her life. But she also remembered that Lady Hawthorne had been her mother's sister, had once been kind to her when she was a child, before envy had poisoned her heart. "I will arrange for a proper burial," she said finally. "She did terrible things, but she was still family. My mother would have wanted her to rest with dignity." Count Blackwood nodded approvingly. "You are more generous than most would be in your position." After he left, Edward found Evelyn standing at the window, staring out at the gardens. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I heard about your aunt. Are you all right?" "I think so. I feel sad, in a way. Not for her death specifically, but for the waste of it all. She spent her entire life consumed by bitterness and jealousy, and what did it bring her? Nothing but isolation and misery. It is a cautionary tale, I suppose." "You are nothing like her," Edward said firmly. "You could have become bitter after what she did to you, after what I did to you. But instead, you chose forgiveness and growth. That takes far more strength than holding a grudge." Evelyn turned in his arms to face him. "I had a good reason to choose forgiveness. You proved yourself worthy of it. Not everyone gets that chance." "No," Edward agreed. "We were very lucky. In spite of everything, we found our way to each other." As spring turned to summer, Evelyn discovered she was with child again. Their youngest daughter, Margaret, was now 5, and they had thought their family complete. But this surprise was welcomed with joy by both parents and the older children. "Another baby," Catherine, their eldest at 14, said with delight. "Oh, Mother, how wonderful. May I help care for it?" "Of course, darling. I shall need all the help I can get with 5 children." This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous ones, and the doctor ordered Evelyn to rest more than usual. She chafed at the restrictions, but Edward was adamant, practically carrying her to bed when she tried to do too much. "You will rest if I have to tie you to the bed," he threatened half seriously. "You would not dare," Evelyn replied, but she smiled as she said it. During the months of confinement, Evelyn returned to her reading with renewed enthusiasm. Mrs. Blackwell sent her a package of books, including several new novels that she thought Evelyn would enjoy. Among them was one titled A Historical Romance, set during the medieval period, full of knights and ladies and grand gestures. "This is quite dramatic," Evelyn told Edward one evening as he sat with her. "The hero rescues the heroine from a castle siege. I cannot imagine you scaling walls and fighting off enemies." "I would if I had to," Edward said seriously. "If you were in danger, there is nothing I would not do to reach you." "My brave knight," Evelyn teased, but she was touched by the sincerity in his voice. The baby, another son, arrived in the autumn during a spectacular storm. As thunder crashed and rain lashed the windows, Evelyn labored with Edward holding her hand, refusing to leave despite the midwife's disapproval. "You should not have to go through this alone," he said, when Evelyn tried to send him away. "We are in this together, remember. Complete honesty, no more walls." When their son finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Edward wept openly. 5 children, he said in wonder. 5 perfect children. How did I get so lucky?" "We got lucky," Evelyn corrected. "Both of us." They named him William, and he completed their family in a way they had not expected. Catherine doted on him, the boys treated him like a living toy, and Margaret was convinced he was her personal baby. As the years passed, Evelyn and Edward settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had become that rarest of things in their social circle, a genuinely happy couple. Other members of the ton would watch them at social events, see the way they looked at each other, the easy affection between them, and wonder how they had managed it. Some remembered the scandal of their early marriage, the rumors and gossip that had swirled around the cursed bride. But most had forgotten, or at least chose not to speak of it. The Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne were pillars of society now, respected for their charitable works, admired for their family, envied for their obvious devotion to each other. One evening, at a ball celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary, Evelyn and Edward stood together watching their children dance. Catherine was married now herself, with her own child on the way. The boys were at university, home for the occasion. Margaret and William, still young, were being taught the steps by patient relatives. 25 years, Evelyn mused, though really, it feels like we have been married for only 24, given that first year. "Do not remind me," Edward groaned. "I still cannot believe I was such a fool." "You were young, we both were." Evelyn leaned against him, comfortable in his presence. "Besides, if you had not been such a fool, we would not have this story to tell." "What story is that?" "The one about how love is worth fighting for even when it seems impossible. The one about how people can change and grow. The one about how the best things in life are those we almost lose." Edward pulled her onto the dance floor, and as they moved together to the music, Evelyn felt the same thrill she had felt in their early days of reconciliation, when every touch was precious because it was not guaranteed. They had been given a second chance, and they had not wasted it. "I love you," Edward murmured in her ear as they danced, "in case I have not mentioned it today." "You have mentioned it 5 times, but I never tire of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it for the rest of our lives." As the music swelled and the candles cast golden light over the ballroom, Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of her happiness. It had not been an easy journey. There had been pain and betrayal, loneliness and doubt, but they had come through it stronger, more united, more deeply in love than she had ever imagined possible. This was their real story, not the romance of a perfect courtship, but the deeper romance of 2 flawed people choosing each other again and again, through good times and bad, through misunderstanding and reconciliation, through all the small daily choices that built a life together. And it was, she thought as Edward spun her in a graceful turn, the most beautiful story she could have asked for. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth every struggle. Not because they had never fallen, but because they had always found the strength to rise again together. Years later, when Evelyn was old and grey, sitting in the library at Ashbourne House with grandchildren playing at her feet, she would sometimes take down that copy of Pride and Prejudice from the shelf. She would read it again, smiling at the romance of it, the neat resolution of all conflicts, the fairy tale quality of the ending. But she would always close the book thinking that her own story was better. It was messier, more complicated, harder won. But it was hers and Edward's, and it was real in a way that no fiction could ever be. Edward would find her there sometimes, lost in thought with the book in her lap. He was older too now, his hair silver, his face lined with the marks of a life well lived. But his eyes, those grey eyes that had once held such pain and suspicion, were warm with love when they looked at her. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask, the same question he had asked 1,000 times over the years. And Evelyn would smile, take his hand and say, "About how lucky we are, about how close we came to losing everything, about how grateful I am that we found our way back to each other." "We did not find our way back," Edward would correct gently. "You fought your way back to me. You refused to give up even when I gave you every reason to. I owe everything I have to your courage." "And I owe everything to your willingness to change," Evelyn would reply. "We saved each other, Edward. That is the truth of it." And so they would sit together in comfortable silence, hands entwined, hearts united, 2 people who had been tested by fire and emerged not just intact but transformed. Their love was not the passionate whirlwind of romance novels, but something deeper, steadier, more enduring. It was a love built on rubble and ash, on mistakes acknowledged and forgiveness granted, on the daily choice to try, to communicate, to be vulnerable despite the risk. It was a love that had survived the worst and celebrated the best. It was, in every sense that mattered, real. And in the end, that was the greatest romance of all. Not the fantasy of perfection, but the reality of 2 imperfect people creating something beautiful from the pieces of what was broken. Not the easy path, but the one that led through darkness to light. Not love at first sight, but love earned through time and tested by trial. Their story became a legend of sorts in the family, passed down through generations. The tale of the Duke who almost lost his Duchess, and the Duchess who refused to be lost. The story of pride overcome and prejudice defeated, of walls torn down and hearts opened. A historical romance not of grand gestures and dramatic rescues, but of quiet courage and persistent hope. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way. With two old people still holding hands, still choosing each other, still grateful for the miracle of their second chance. Still, after all those years, very much in love. Because in the end, the greatest love stories are not those that begin with perfection, but those that find perfection in perseverance. Not those where love comes easily, but where love is chosen again and again in spite of difficulty. Not the romances that never face darkness, but those that create light in the darkness together. That was the romance of Edward and Evelyn, Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne. And it was, without question, the most beautiful story their family had ever known. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, Echoes of Romance.